Yeah. So basically, the residual stresses were accounted for by using this. It is also known as tangent modulus method or the double modulus method. So basically, what it says is that the modulus of material changes once it yields, and if you account for that effect, then the actual behavior of the column in compression of a perfectly straight column in compression can be accounted for. So instead of a theoretical curve, you will get something like this, and that is with an assumption of this idealized residual stress distribution. If the residual stress distribution is more accurate or more accurately predicted, then you may get a more accurate prediction of the behavior also. However, this method only accounts for the effects of residual stresses, and we know from the earlier discussion that that is not the only factor. Residual stress is not the only factor. There are other factors that should control the behavior of a column. The other one, more important one, is the column imperfections. I would not say more important one, but it is residual stress factor is more significant for columns of certain slenderness values, and the imperfection factor is more significant for columns of slightly different imperfection value, slenderness value. That is in this domain. That's where the imperfection factor starts to play a more significant role. Okay, so this method, of course, does not account for that. In this method, the capacity of the column is still given by pi square EI by L square. So pi square EI divided by L square was derived for a perfectly straight column. Okay, perfectly straight column. The only thing that we change in that pi square EI by L square is the effective EI value, which accounts for some part or accounts for the plasticization or yielding of a part of the cross section. Fine. Okay, so what is the other factor? The other factor is imperfections and eccentricity. So the column that, as we had discussed in the beginning, the column that we buy or the columns that we use in the field may not always be perfectly straight, or they may not always be concentrically loaded. Sometimes they may be eccentrically loaded. So if you have an eccentrically loaded column, then as you apply the load P, the column would start bending a little bit. And what we are plotting here is the lateral deformation of the column versus axial load. Okay. So if this was a column, and a load of P was applied on this column. So as load P is applied, if for a perfectly straight column, the behavior would be following this line exactly, the line that you can see, vertical axis. And then at some point, suddenly the buckling will happen. And this point is called the point of bifurcation. And this kind of a buckling is called bifurcation buckling. So this behavior is expected from a perfectly straight column. Okay. So the column will have no lateral deflection up to a level of FCC, which is corresponding to your Euler buckling capacity. FCC, that is stress level multiplied by the area, that gives you the column capacity or critical column capacity for Euler buckling. Okay, that is this column, perfectly straight column. But if the column has some imperfection, then as soon as we start applying any axial load, let's say the column was slightly imperfect. Okay, I'm exaggerating, of course. So if you apply a P, as soon as we apply any P load, so as soon as the P load becomes non-zero, so this is 0 P, but as soon as P becomes non-zero, we will start seeing an increase in this deflection. Okay, so if we consider this one as not a deflection, this is original imperfection, so we will get some deflection. Okay, if we don't count the original imperfection as deflection, we only count the additional deflection as deflection, so we will start getting some deflection. And for a small imperfection, the deflection will be increasing gradually, but still it will buckle, and it will be buckling at a load which is very close to the Euler buckling capacity. So that is the behavior 2A. Okay, so your P critical now is still very close to your original P critical. Alternatively, if the imperfection is large, then the behavior will be like 2B, wherein it will be buckling slightly sooner than the P critical. Plus also it will be having large deformations, large lateral deformations. And then you may have a situation of eccentrically applied load, whereas actually even if the column is perfectly straight, This kind of situation arises or is accounted for more frequently in concrete columns. So your column might be perfectly straight, or at least you try to keep it perfectly straight, and you have a beam or a number of beams coming and connecting to this column. But the way the loads are transferred between these by these beams to the column are in such a way that the load is not exactly at the center of the column. So this is the center of the column. Here is the center of the column. And the load, the net load that is coming from these beams to the column may not be acting exactly at the center. So if I look in the plan view, this is the column cross section. There is one beam here, one beam here, and one beam here. And they are all transferring some shear. The beams are transferring the shear, which is turning into an axial load on the column. So since there is no beam on this side, for example, in this case, or maybe there may be an uneven amount of load being applied by the beams to the column, for whatever reason, you may have a situation where the actual point of loading of the column is somewhere here rather than here. Instead of at the cross, it is at the dot, which is at an eccentricity from the center. So this kind of situation can arise, and that will lead to a deflection in the column, lateral deflection in the column, even from the beginning, right? So that deflection is basically what you see here. This deflection. This is not really a deflection, but this is just the eccentricity marked as a deflection. You may even ignore it, then you can shift this curve back to 0 and then plot it. Okay, so again, that leads to lateral deflection, lateral deformation, and all these factors lead to a reduction in the final load capacity. So you will not achieve the full load capacity, but slightly less than that. Also, even if the maximum load is still very close to it, sometimes the lateral deflection may be so large that you may have to limit the load for that lateral deflection, because the lateral deflection at that limit is very large, and this happens often in slender columns. Okay, so now comes the question of how do we account for the imperfection effect. We have learned how to account, or we learned one way of accounting for the residual stress effects. How do we account for the imperfection effects? Unfortunately, the theoretical methods of accounting for both of them together are very cumbersome and are not really commonly taught in a classroom. But the two of them can be accounted for separately, and the method that I'm going to discuss is also at the foundation of the equations that are available in IS 800. So please pay attention. Okay, so this involves some derivation, and therefore I'm going to use. You will get to see my pen shape skills, and you will get to laugh at it. Okay, so there will be some derivation required, some sketches I have to draw. So. Okay, so we will look at a column that is not perfectly straight to start with. So this is what a column was supposed to be. And we are deriving this equation for only a simply supported case. For all other cases, you can use nothing changes at the fundamental level, only some minor changes have to be made because of the boundary conditions, so that can be done at a later stage. Okay. So if I have this load acting on this column N, now this column could be a straight column, or this column could be an imperfect column. So let's say the column is an imperfect column. So there is some level of imperfection in this column. And how much is the imperfection? Let's quantify that. So this quantification, delta 0, which is basically, if I call it V anywhere, so what is basically, so delta 0 is the maximum imperfection, and V0 is the imperfection anywhere. So V0 is actually a function of X. What is my X? I'm counting my X from here. Okay. Now, what would be the relationship between delta 0 and V0? Of course, delta 0 is maximum value of V0. That is obvious, right? Delta 0 is the maximum value of V0. Okay. What would be the relationship between delta 0 and V0? We don't know, but we can make some assumption which looks reasonable and which satisfies the boundary conditions. What relationship can work? Anybody can guess?
Delta 0 equals to V0 L by 2, X by 2.
Yes. At X equals to L by 2, it will be maximum.
So we will, so you are saying delta V0 is equal to, V0 is at any given x, delta 0 is at x by 2. So delta 0 is equal to V0, value of V0 at x by 2. That is correct. That is obvious. That is basically, you are saying maximum value occurs at x is equal to L by 2. I agree. But that is not really the full relationship. So
You can
there
use
can be
sign
various,
differences.
yeah, we can assume a half sine curve. Okay. So if I assume a half sine curve, delta 0 can be written as, sorry, V0 can be written as delta 0 sine pi x by L. So when L is equal to, when x is equal to L, or when x is equal to 0, what do I get? V0 is equal to 0, because then I get sine pi or sine 0, which is 0. So at x is equal to 0 or x is equal to L at this point, at either ends, my V0 turns out to be 0. But when x is equal to L by 2, when x is equal to L by 2, right? Then I get pi sine pi by 2, which is 1. So then I get delta 0. Okay, that looks okay, right? Okay, so now for the same column, initially it had some imperfection. Then under the load n, so maybe here there was no load n in the beginning, and then you apply some load n, and then it deforms, it deflects like so. Okay. So at this time, I get an additional deflection of v, which is a function of x. Similarly, the maximum value of this v is called delta. Okay. The length is of course L, I am not marking it. So again, the relationship between V and delta can be given by V is equal to delta sine pi x by L. Fine. Any questions so far? No questions, right? Looks okay. Everything looks seems to be okay. So this is just the imperfection. Imperfection in the column. And this is V is equal to actual deflection. Fine. Now, you have all solved the equations for the buckling of a state column, right? In your ASM class, haven't you? You have solved the equations. Like you have drawn the free body diagram of a column buckling. So if the column deflects by delta amount here, then what is the internal moment introduced because of the axial load that is acting, and so on, right? You have done that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I know that you can already. So let's look at this column, this particular column that is deflected because of load n. And if I let me draw it here itself. One second. Load n is acting here, and another load n is acting here, and you would have a deflection of this much here. So So what will happen is that your n load has, as the column moves, the n load will, the location of the load n will also change if I'm drawing somewhere at x height. Okay. This location, this n load will change, but also at the same time, there will be a moment acting on this column. That will be an internal moment. Okay. Now, if I draw the free body diagram of this part, there is no moment here at the bottom, but there is a moment here at this point. Okay. For this part, if I want to draw, if I want to write the moment equilibrium equation, m will be equal to, m is internal moment, and external moment is how much?
N into lever arm between these.
N multiplied by the lever arm. What is the total deflection?
V plus V naught.
V plus V naught. That is correct, right? Obviously. This part is V and this part is V naught. So the actual external moment or the secondary moment, it is the secondary moment. External moment is actually secondary moment. It is external moment for this part. That is N multiplied by V. And the M is the internal moment. So the two moments will cancel each other out. So M is equal to NV plus V naught. Okay. This M is the internal moment. So M should be equal to EI phi. Phi is the curvature, right? Don't confuse this phi with another phi that will come in this discussion later. Okay. That's why I'm pointing it out that phi is curvature here. Phi or phi, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And phi in this particular case is equal to minus d2y by dx2. Okay. Or d2 v by dx2. Right? Or is it, my question is now, d2v plus v2 by dx2. So there is one possible phi definition which is given by d2v by dx2. The other possible definition is given by d2v plus v naught divided by dx2. Which one should I use in this expression? Which phi should I use? Did you follow? So there are two curvatures. One is the curvature that is gained from while moving from here to here. Okay, and the other one is the curvature, total curvature here. So which curvature should we use? Yeah, now go ahead. Who was saying?
Me, sir. Sir,
yeah,
it should be d2v by dx2.
d2v by dx2. Very good, but why?
Because that deflection will be generating the moment. That curvature will be generating the internal moment.
Very good. So basically what is happening is that when the member was at this state, the initial imperfection, that was when no load was being applied and there was no bending moment in the member. It is just stress-free state. So this imperfection state, or this state rather, here, when the member was here, at that time it was imperfect but without stresses. It was just the original geometry of this member. So only what it gained from here to here is introducing any internal moments. However, when we talk about external moments, then at that time you have to account for the whole, because that is the movement from the vertical axis. So this much of deflection, that is delta plus delta naught, or v plus v naught, that the entire thing is introducing an external moment. However, internal moment is generated only because of this movement from here onwards. Got it? So that's why we will take this and not this. So this one we will not take, but we will take only this. So my phi is substituted here. Phi is equal to d2v by dx2, or I can call it v double prime minus v double prime. So phi is equal to minus v double prime, that I substitute here. So m is equal to minus ei v double prime is equal to n v plus v naught. By the way, this derivation is also available in your slides, so you don't have to sit down and note down. Just you can, as long as you are following it, that should be enough. Okay, some of these discussions may not be available. So why are we not considering this v plus v naught? Likewise, why are we taking it minus v naught? Do you follow why are we taking it minus phi is equal to minus v double prime and not v double prime? Phi is equal to minus v double prime and not v double prime. Okay, I want to give it to you as an exercise. You try to figure it out in the next class. If you can't figure it out, I'll explain to you in the next class. Okay? Because you are taking that class in ASM, so you should be able to find it out. Why are you taking phi is equal to minus v double prime and not phi is equal to v double prime? Got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now this is my governing differential equation. How do you get your governing differential equation? By force equilibrium or moment equilibrium. Governing differential equation. Now what we can do is, we already knew the relationship between V and delta. So we don't want to deal with a V that we don't know how it varies. So we will try to substitute it with an assumed deformed shape and assumed shape of imperfection, which is a function of X. Okay. So what we will do is, we will substitute the values of V and V naught. So when we do that, what do I get? Minus EI. Okay, so my V was equal to delta sine pi x by L. So V was equal to delta sine pi x by L. So its double derivative will be equal to, delta will remain delta, correct? Sine will remain sine, but it will become minus. So yeah, it will become plus sine, right? Pi x by L will remain pi x by L, but the pi square and L square factor will come, pi by L will come twice in front. Okay, so this is the double derivative of V after substituting for the values of V and V naught. Likewise, this will be equal to N. Now for V, I will substitute here, and V naught I will substitute from here. What do I get is delta plus delta naught, right? Sine pi x divided by L. All right. So sine pi x divided by L and sine pi x divided by L can be cancelled out. If I look carefully, if I take this part out, pi square EI divided by L square, what does it give me? What does it give me? Pi square EI by L square.
Euler load.
Yes.
Euler load, sir.
That is, we call it P critical, let's say. That is elastic buckling capacity of a straight column. Of a straight column. Okay. So we call it P critical. We substitute that. P critical multiplied by delta is equal to, sorry, not P critical. We were using term N critical. So N. Sorry. We were using the term N for the load. N critical multiplied by delta is equal to N delta plus delta naught. Fine. Or what we can call is N divided by N critical is equal to delta divided by delta plus delta naught. Or you want to solve it further, what you get is delta divided by Delta divided by delta naught, I think, is equal to n divided by n critical minus n. Let me check once. Yeah, delta divided by delta naught is equal to n divided by n critical minus n. Okay. So far we have not done anything new. We have not introduced any theory or theorem here. What we are doing is we are only deriving the equation for an imperfect column. Okay. And what we are doing is that we are saying, okay, at any load n, your delta will be related with n in such a way. Okay. No questions about this one, right? This seems all okay. There is nothing new that we have learned. We have just used the older information to get a relationship between n and delta. Fine. Okay. Now comes a theorem again. So now comes a theorem that is of our interest here. For we call it the theory of first yield. I don't remember who had proposed it. I have not been able to find who had proposed it, but I'm sure in some textbooks it might be given. So what it says is that if I had a perfectly straight column loaded concentrically, okay, so this is the column cross section I'm looking at, and this is the length. The length is in this direction. And if it was loaded concentrically, what kind of stress distribution will I get? I'll get a stress distribution which is uniform, okay, in compression, of course. But if this column was not loaded uniformly, then what kind of stress distribution will I get? If it was an imperfect column or if it was loaded concentrically, either way, I'll get a stress distribution which looks like this. So at one edge, I will have higher stresses than the other. Agree? So the stress on this side will be higher than the stress on this side. Okay? And what will be the stress on this side? We can calculate that. How do we know that? Sigma max, that is the stress on the higher side, where the stresses are more, will be given by NA plus, what is the external moment? N is the load. But this load is not really acting here. It is acting somewhere here, effectively, from outside, because the column has shifted. So N delta plus delta naught. Right? So this is the shift, because the column has bowed by delta plus delta naught at this location, maximum location, okay, divided by S. S is your section modulus. Any doubt here? Which is, what is it equal to? I divided by?
I divided by
Y.
Y,
Y
sir.
max. Correct? Y max, if the two Y's are not equal. All right. So this is basically your section modulus. And what you are saying is that sigma max, that is sigma max here, that's this stress value will be equal to force divided by total area plus the moment effect. So because of the moment, you will have some stress, that is stress. Okay. Now the theory of first yield says that first it says that under the axial load, the uneven loads will be there. So uneven stresses will be there, as I had shown here. And as a result, the failure occurs. This is the first yield, the theory of first yield. The failure takes place when the first fiber yield, first fiber yields. That is why it's called first yield theory, when the first fiber yields. So in this kind of a cross section where stresses are non-uniform, which fiber is going to yield first? This one, right? Because that is at a higher stress. So sigma max, when sigma max becomes Fy, that's when the column failure occurs. So that is basically a way of defining the column failure. So earlier we were saying the column failure occurs when it reaches the buckling capacity or Euler buckling capacity for the reduced cross section. Now what it is saying is that this theory is saying that the failure occurs when the maximum stress in the cross section reaches the yield stress. Okay, that need not be really the limit. I mean, actually, even like who is to decide that one fiber has yielded is the limit of the column to fail? But that is the kind of limit state we are defining here in this theory. Okay, so of course it has to be validated with experiments, and they have done that, and they have found it to be a very good estimate with some caveats. So sigma max will be equal to this much, and which can be equal to, according to this theory, this value has to be equal to Fy. Fine. Or in other words, Fya will be equal to n plus n delta plus delta naught A divided by S. I have multiplied with A all over. Okay. All right. Now we had just derived delta by delta naught was equal to n divided by n critical minus n. What was n critical here? What was n critical?
Pi square EI by.
Yeah, pi square EI by L square. That is just it. Basically, that is the capacity of a column if it were perfectly straight. And if we are substituting that delta here, or if we are substituting this delta here, what does this n mean? Then this n corresponds to failure n, right? Because when we put n Fy, this becomes the failure n. That means when we substitute this one, we are talking about the delta that is failure delta, or n that is failure n. Okay. So our n critical is the failure load of a perfectly straight column. But now in this case, our n becomes the failure load of our imperfect column. Okay. So, and Fya can be called what? We can call it Ny. So that is the yield strength of the column. Fine. So we'll call it Ny is equal to n plus n delta is equal to delta naught plus this much. So delta naught we can take out 1 plus n divided by n critical minus n A divided by S. Is that okay? We can also take Ny out. Sorry, we can take n out. So what we are left with 1 plus A divided by S delta naught. Delta naught. I'm just doing some n critical divided by. Sorry, I missed something. A divided by S delta naught. Should it be, when I do the substitution here, this is fine, right? This step is okay, right? 1 plus delta plus delta naught is equal to n divided by. So this will be equal to n 1 plus a by s. We'll take n critical minus n in the denominator. So we are left with n critical minus n plus n. So we are left with n critical. Okay, or n divided by ny. So we are taking n divided by ny. We are bringing ny to this side and taking this to the other side. We will be left with 1 plus. I missed delta naught.
So delta is missing.
Yeah, delta naught is missing. Sorry, I fixed that. 1 plus delta naught n critical divided by n critical minus n a by s. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now I want to solve for n divided by ny basically, or I want to solve for n. Now, if you look at this equation, even if you had looked at this equation here, you can see that this is a parabolic equation for n, because there is n in the numerator as well as in the denominator here. So when you multiply with n all over, you can get rid of the n from the denominator, but you will have terms of n square, right? So this is a parabolic equation, or this is a quadratic equation. So we can solve for it as a quadratic equation. I'm not, the intermediate steps are given in the lecture notes. I'm just running to the solution directly for the quadratic equation. So the solution will be for n divided by ny will be equal to 1 plus naught a by s n critical by n y divided by 2 minus half plus 1 plus delta naught a by s n critical by ny, sorry, 2ny squared minus n critical by ny. This is nothing but, you are familiar with the equation, the solution of a quadratic equation, right? Minus b plus minus square root, the same thing. Okay, so the expression looks a little bit bigger, but if you try to break it down to smaller pieces, let's do a few renomenclature. So let's call delta 0 a by s. If you look at delta 0 a by s, so a divided by s is only the cross section property, right? Cross section area is a, s is the section modulus. Both of them are cross section properties. Delta 0 is the maximum imperfection in the column, okay, which depends on the cross section, the type of cross section you have, which axis you are looking at, and how much length it has. So if it's a longer column, you will have larger length delta. Okay, but this is basically in a way cross section and imperfection property. Let's call it eta. Okay. Also another property, another value ny by n critical. This we have already called something in the past, in the previous slides. Anybody can recall? Ny is the yield capacity and n critical is the buckling capacity of a perfectly straight column. What were we calling it?
Lambda.
Yes, lambda square. Here, if you can see, lambda squared was equal to Fy by F critical, or FCC or FCR, whatever. So that is equal to lambda squared. Fine. So this is a cross-section property multiplied by the maximum imperfection value. Now, if we substitute that, our n divided by ny will be left to be equal to 1 plus eta by lambda square. Okay, because ny by n critical is lambda square, so therefore it will be 1 divided by lambda square divided by 2 minus half plus 1 plus eta divided by 2 lambda squared minus 1 divided by lambda square. Okay, now if you, this is denominator lambda square, right? So if I take a common denominator lambda square, what will I be left with? 1 plus eta plus lambda square, right? 1 here, 1 here, lambda eta here, and lambda square from here. So let's call 1 plus eta plus lambda square divided by 2 to be equal to phi. This is not the curvature phi, this is a different phi that we are using. This terminology is now getting closer to what we have in the Indian code. Okay, so let's call this phi. So n plus ny. Okay, and can somebody tell me what is n here?
Failure load of the imperfect column.
Yes, failure load of the imperfect column. Failure load based on the theory that the failure occurs when the first fiber yields. So it is the load when the first fiber yields, strictly speaking. And that's what we are calling failure load as per this theory. So 1 plus eta plus lambda square divided by 2 will be equal to phi divided by lambda square minus p square divided by lambda square. Sorry, not phi square. P divided by lambda square. Same thing I'm doing here. So if I take 2 lambda square as the denominator common, then we are left with lambda square plus eta, 1 plus eta square. So that is substituted with phi divided by lambda square squared. This is square comes here as 2 is this is square minus 1 by lambda square to the power 0.5. That is square root. Okay. Now what we see here is 1 minus 2, right? Or a minus b. So a minus b is also equal to a square minus b square divided by a plus b. Agree? Let's do that here. What do I get? If I do a square minus b square, I get phi square divided by lambda to the power 4 minus, again, it's square. So that is phi square divided by lambda to the power 4. So the 2 will cancel out. What I'll be left with is 1 divided by lambda square. So a square minus b square will give me 1 divided by lambda square divided by this plus this. P by lambda square plus this much square minus 1 by lambda square 4.5. Okay. What can I call it? I take the lambda square down from the numerator, I take it to denominator, it will cancel out this lambda square. So this lambda square and this lambda square will cancel out. And here also it will have the same effect. So I can call it 1 divided by phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square. Okay. That is my n divided by ny. Or in other words, if I call it average stress, so or n, let's not change to stress yet. N is equal to ny divided by p plus square root of p square minus lambda square. There n is my failure capacity as per the theory. That's how it is failure is defined. And y is the yield capacity of the cross section. And this phi, etc., we have derived along the way. What is happening with this? So my phi is equal to, in this expression, failure load or the column capacity, you can call it, and Y, of course, you know, yield capacity. And phi is equal to 1 plus eta plus lambda square divided by 2. And eta was equal to, we had substituted eta for something, A by S. And lambda square we already knew was equal to Ny by N critical. Fine. So if you substitute all this, this is your expression. Okay. Now, have you seen this kind of an expression, phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square in the denominator before? Have you guys seen this?
Indian code.
Yes. So let me take you to the Indian code. This is page number 34, section 7, design of compression members. If you look at this expression under heading 7.1.2.1, the design compressive stress of an actually loaded compressive member shall be calculated using the following equation. FCD, which is basically your design compressive capacity, okay, that is your design load, that is equal to, now ignore the gamma factor, that is a factor of safety that comes later, is equal to Fy. What did we have? Failure capacity N was equal to Ny. So similarly, if you divide with A, area of the cross section on both sides, you will get F design is equal to Fy divided by phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square, phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square. Okay, so these are the same expressions that we have shown, and this entire expression is also called chi. So this whole thing, 1 divided by phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square, is also known as chi. Okay. This factor chi, stress reduction factor. Okay. That is this stress reduction factor that we are getting because of imperfections. So here in this entire derivation, we have got the stress reduction factors, correct? Only because of imperfections. But we have never accounted for the residual stress effect. And if you look closely again, the expression for phi that we had used was 1 plus eta plus lambda square by 2. Okay, and eta was delta 0 A by S. Now look at their expression of phi. They don't have any eta here, do they? No. But they have an expression for phi. Our expression for phi was half times something. Their expression for phi is half times something. Which thing is that? 1 plus lambda square plus alpha lambda minus 0.2. So their eta value in the Indian code, if I can write, Indian code also, so the Indian code is using this equation exactly as it is. It is also using this equation exactly as it is. How do we know? Here it is. Lambda is equal to square root of Fy by Fcc. So lambda is also used as it is. When it comes to these two equations, the Indian code has P is equal to, let's say Indian code also uses the similar equation for phi, right? Because we have 1 plus lambda square plus eta by 2. They also have 1 plus lambda square plus something divided by 2. So phi is also same. What is different is the value of eta. As per our derivation, the value of eta was delta naught A by S, and as per IS 800, the eta is what is it equal to? Alpha times lambda minus 0.2. Right? So this is the major difference between the Indian code and the theoretical derivation based on an imperfect column and the theory of first yield. Okay, and likewise there are other theories, including the residual stress effect, etc. There are theories of the the fiber in the centroid of the column yielding and so on. There are a couple of other theories also, and they give slightly different expressions. Ultimately, it comes down to, the whole equation is derived very nicely, but ultimately it came down to this approximation. So eta here was taken as some constant, which was a cross-section property, A by S property. Also, it was the length property, because your delta 0 will depend on the length primarily. What is the maximum imperfection? But now, for any given column in the field, you would not know what is the imperfection in the column or what is the maximum imperfection in any column, right? Because we are proposing a design equation. So that's why they did some, based on some lot of empirical data, they came up with this equation wherein they said that if eta is taken as alpha times lambda minus 0.2, we are good enough. So then we can substitute eta here. Instead of this eta value, we will use this eta value, and then we can use the rest of the equation to calculate the column capacity. What is alpha here? What is alpha here in this equation? In the Indian code?
Imperfection factor, sir.
Imperfection factor, sir.
Imperfection
Yes, sir.
factor.
Very good. Yeah, so alpha is known as an imperfection factor here. Okay. Now, basically what happens is that this factor eta accounts for both imperfection as well as the residual stress. Okay. In fact, the amount of imperfection increases as the length of the column increases. Okay. So if the column unsupported length of the column is longer, then the imperfection is higher. So to be strictly correct, I should not say that alpha alone accounts for the imperfection effect, or alpha should not be called imperfection factor. You can call it imperfection factor, but you should be clear in your mind that this expression, total expression, alpha times lambda minus 0.2, this total expression accounts for two effects. Which are those two effects?
Residual stresses and imperfection.
Residual stress and imperfection both. So this eta, which, so our Indian code does not mention eta anywhere. It simply says this is the expression, alpha multiplied by lambda minus 0.2. The two of them together account for imperfection and residual stresses. Okay, not only one. And more importantly, alpha is likely to account more for the residual stress, and lambda minus 0.2 should have more role to play with the imperfections. I mean, it's premature, or it's not a very mature thing to say that this is how it is split, but that is what it is more likely. Okay, so even though alpha is called as an imperfection factor, it does not only account for the geometric imperfection effects. If anything, it actually accounts for residual stresses more than the imperfection effect. Okay, so alpha values are given for different buckling classes A, B, C, and D. And what do these buckling classes correspond to? You have taken the class already in undergraduate, so you should know. These are the different curves that are given for slenderness. So as the slenderness of the column increases, this is the lambda value on the horizontal axis. So as the slenderness increases, the column capacity decreases. And for different buckling classes, A, B, C, and D. And what do A, B, C, and D depend on? Or the alpha value depends on? Or how do you decide whether a column falls into A, B, C, or D category?
For table.
In table 10.
Yes. What does it depend on? Again, in the table 10, what is the input parameter?
The cross section.
Yes. So it depends on the, yeah, it depends on the cross-section property. So you can notice here that the cross-section, so flange thickness, for example, is mentioned between 40 to 100 mm. Then you take a lower class, right? So if the flange thickness is very high, more than 40 mm, that is almost 2 inches or quarter to 1 3/4 of an inch, something like that. That onwards up to 100 mm, that is very thick flange. What had I told you about thick flanges? What is peculiar? What is the peculiar thing about thick sections with thick flanges? Anybody?
They do not undergo plate buckling, sir.
No, I'm talking about jumbo sections. Had I mentioned jumbo sections ever? When the flanges are very thick.
No, sir.
Okay, severe sections will be more, sir.
Yes. So sections with very thick plates that are made of hot rod sections particularly, the hot rod sections made of thick plates. See, what you had said in the beginning was like somebody had answered, I didn't catch the name, that they will not undergo local buckling, right? That's what you had said?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is perfectly correct answer, but not relevant here. Local buckling issues we will discuss later. What I'm talking about here is the issue of residual stresses. So if your alpha factor was only accounting for the imperfections, that is geometric imperfections, this distinction between thickness of the flange being less than 40 or being more than 40, then if it is less than 40, then you account, let's say, call it classes A and B. But if it is more than 40, you call them in classes B and C, that is lower classes. B and C is lower than A and B, right? So why are we doing that? Because it is residual stress effect. Okay. Imperfection effect, where is it visible? How do we know that this is also accounting for imperfection effect, alpha here? If you look at this, so about which axis buckling we are talking about? So if we are talking about ZZ axis, that is major axis buckling or minor axis buckling? Buckling about ZZ axis.
Major axis.
Major axis, sir.
Yes, no.
Sure. Is this the major axis buckling?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Who is it? Who is so sure that it's major axis buckling?
Vishal, sir.
Vishal? Okay. Anybody thinks that it is a minor axis buckling?
No, sir, major.
Okay, nobody thinks that way. All right, okay, then I have to go with majority. Okay, so yeah, so ZZ axis buckling about ZZ axis is the major axis buckling. And if you remember when we were doing the discussion initially about imperfections, I had said that the rolling effect is such that the hot rod sections are more likely to be imperfect in the minor axis than in the major axis. Okay, and that you can see. I mean, if you buy any hot rod sections, especially I section or something in the field, you will see that if you put the I section in straight and try to just visually you try to see whether it is perfectly aligned or not, it is more likely to have a slight curvature in the minor axis than in the major axis. Okay, I had even drawn it slightly. So as it is more likely to be imperfect in YY axis buckling, that's why you use a lower class in YY axis than in the ZZ axis. Okay, like same A versus B here and B versus C here. Okay. So basically, this is just to point out that the alpha factor or the expression alpha multiplied by lambda minus 0.2, it incorporates both effects, imperfection as well as residual stress. Okay. Otherwise, why would it matter whether the residual, if it was only imperfection, then residual stress, then the thickness should not have been accounted for. If it was only residual stress, then the axis of buckling did not matter. But it plays both ways. Fine. So this is the equation. This is the imperfection factor that you have to use. So it is called imperfection factor, but it is not only accounting for geometric imperfection. It is also accounting for the residual stresses. Okay. And then there is also a table available. Sorry. Okay. There is also this table available which you can use. So in this table for different classes, class A, class B, class C, class B, this is called table 8. For 4 classes, it gives you the values of the FCD value, the values of chi directly, that factor chi that you can multiply with your Fy to get the FCD value. So for any given Fy and KL by R, that is effective length, effective slenderness, that is not relative slenderness, that is KL by R. So we have been dealing with 2 types of slendernesses, right? One is lambda and the other one is KL by R. So KL by R is easier to find out. So KL by R you use in this table to get the chi factor, and then once you get the chi factor, you substitute that here. This is the chi factor which is equal to this value. You substitute that here. So chi multiplied by Fy divided by gamma m0 is going to give you FCD. Okay. Now what will happen is that for this particular expression sometimes for very small lambda values will also give you a value of chi from this expression that you can calculate will sometimes turn out to be more than 1. So if that happens, then you have to keep it under 1. So there is this limit set. Okay. Right. So that is basically corresponding to this possibilities. So if I extend this plot, you can see this plot of A, right? So let me see if I can write on top of it. So this curve A, if I extend in this side, it will extend this way slightly, but you cannot use more than this. So that's why it is curtailed at this level. Fine. So that is that Fy by gamma m0. That is limited by Fy gamma m0. Okay. So any questions on this part? Okay, I'll go back to my presentations then. So this is the theory of first yield, which gives you almost very similar expression as in the Indian code, only that at the end, this eta factor is slightly an empirical value is introduced instead of our theoretical eta. The eta was theoretically equal to delta 0 A by S, which is substituted, which is replaced with alpha times lambda minus 0.2. Other than that, it's the same equation. The similar approach and similar equations are available in the Indian code, in the European code, in the British code. So that is the approach that we have adopted in India also. And alpha values are given for different types of cross sections. Okay. So these are the 4 curves given in the Indian code. 4 classes of cross sections A, B, C, and D. And this is the theoretical curve. Theoretical elastic buckling curve, and this is the Fy curve by including the effect of factor of safety, gamma m0. So if I take gamma m0 already, here also after dividing by gamma m0, this is the curve I get. So you can see that even for high slenderness, you will get slightly lower capacity. It is never meeting this curve completely, except for very small cross sections, small lengths. Okay. So in this entire expression, you know how to calculate K. We have discussed that for different boundary conditions. You know the values of K. Table 11. Here. So here, this table gives you the values of K for different types of boundary conditions that you can know. R, of course, about which axis you are talking about the bending or buckling. Corresponding R value you can use, and then accordingly you can substitute the values into this equation to get the column capacity. Okay. Now the code says somewhere, I have to check again, that it can be used even for singly symmetric cross sections. Now we had discussed in the past that a singly symmetric cross section, these kind of cross sections are singly symmetric cross section, right? So they can undergo flexure about the axis of asymmetry, but they can also undergo flexural torsion about the axis of symmetry. Okay. However, the code allows us to use this equation, which is derived only for flexural buckling, not flexural torsion. Doubly symmetric and even singly symmetric. That is, even concentrically loaded angles also. So concentrically loaded angle it's an equal-legged concentrically loaded angle. It's a singly symmetric cross section, which can undergo flexural about one axis, but flexural torsional about the other axis. But even for those columns, it allows only to use this equation about both axes. Flexure and flexure about both axes. Even I think I'm not sure if it is an angle which is unequal legged, then what is the approach? Let me see. Table. Yeah, it does not say that it has to be an equal legged angle. Even an unequal legged angle, you can use this equation. Curve C you can use. Okay. So a concentrically loaded angle in compression, you can use curve C. Fine. Any questions so far? Okay. The next part is about the next few slides are about the American approach. So in America, they had done a lot of numerical analysis. From there, these curves were developed. So these were developed by Professor Björn Hode. He's a famous scientist in this area. In his PhD thesis, and these are adopted in the American code. So there are the SSRC guidelines, and then these, and they had he had recommended 4 different curves. 3 are shown here, and for different types of cross sections. And this was all done by based on some numerical analysis he had done, which was verified with the experimental data also. And later on, for the American code, they had distilled these further into single equation. So presently, if you look at all the equations from if you compare our equations, that is IS 800 A, B, C, D curves, these are the 4 Indian curves in the IS 800. And this is the curve that is in the American code, AISC 360. So you can see that most of the curves that are there in the Indian code are conservative, except for A curve, which is for class A, we are slightly, the American code is slightly conservative. But for classes B, C, and D, it is Indian code that is more conservative. And in America, for all kinds of flexural buckling, they use only this one, only single curve. So they have given only a single curve. So American code committees always try to keep the thing simple rather than adding too many options. And even SSRC curves, if you look, these curves are the foundation of the development of your AIC curve. So this curve was developed, this gray curve here was developed based on the findings of these SSRC curves. So SSRC curves, you can see they are slightly on the unconservative side in comparison to the Indian code. So Indian 4 curves are here in green, and SSRC curves are the 3 curves in red. So they are predicting slightly higher values as per SSRC. So that's why the American code, the average one that they have taken, also predicts slightly higher capacity. Okay. So I'll stop here for today's lecture. I think the lecture was only, okay, we are almost done. Yeah, time is also almost over. Fine. Any questions? We have 5 minutes. I hope this was not too boring. We had a little bit of maths here, but it was important to know the background where the equations came from. That's why I worried about, and I insisted on keeping this part in this class discussion, because if you derive the equations for a perfectly straight column, you don't get this chi factor that we see in the Indian code. This chi factor is kind of curious factor, and you get this kind of a curve, chi factor, which is, or this expression for 1 divided by phi plus square root of phi square minus lambda square. You get that curve only when you start with an imperfect column. So even though it should have been a part of more of a ASM course, but I wanted to come because it is primarily focusing on the design aspect. So that's why I decided to cover it. Okay, I hope it was useful for some of you at least. Any questions, concerns, bothers, comments? No? All right then. So we can call it a day now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
So we'll see you in the next class. Let me know how your assignment is going. If you are having any difficulties, you need to discuss something, you let me know. And let me know soon enough. Don't wait till Thursday to find out that you can't solve it. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. See, what happens is that once one person submits the assignment, then extending the deadline without any penalty becomes difficult for me. So I want to have an idea about how the class is doing, right? You understand, right? If one person submits the assignment, then I have to give others like him or her extra marks for that. So then I cannot extend the deadline without any penalty. So you have to let me know soon enough. Okay, fine. Thank you.